Hey, Otis here. If you're listening to Sleepy, you clearly love podcasts that are going to help you get a good night's rest. Well, I'm here to tell you about another really great show called Sleepwave, Sleep Meditations and Stories. This is a really great immersive podcast full of original sleep meditations and bedtime stories, hosted by award-winning voice actress and meditation enthusiast Carissa Vacker. She really has such an amazing voice. It's truly lovely, and the meditations are delivered in friendly and soft tones, getting slower as the episode goes on to encourage sleep. All episodes are also paired with soft meditative music, which I think is a great touch. And the episodes are solution-based, giving you tools to sleep better and find relaxation. She covers topics such as anxiety and stress and fear and finding peace with who you are. This show would be a great addition to your bedtime routine along with Sleepy. So go subscribe to Sleepwave now wherever you listen to podcasts and start listening for free today. Just search Sleepwave on your favorite podcast app and unwind with Carissa tonight. Thanks. Sweet dreams. Hey, my name's Otis Gray, and you're listening to Sleepy. A podcast where I read old books to help you get to sleep. I have a lovely little Christmas story for you tonight. It's actually the beginning of a novel that you can hear in its entirety on our sister podcast, The Daily Book Club. It is a fantastic story by the author of The Wizard of Oz. And before we get to tonight's bedtime story, I just want to say that this episode is so proudly sponsored by Shopify. If you have a business or you've been wanting to start your own business, Shopify helps you do your thing. Nobody does it better. They are the most used checkout service on the planet, and their Shop Pay features boost conversions to 50%, meaning way less left in the cart and more sales for you. It is simply the best business behind the business. And it's a perfect partner no matter what stage of your business you're in. Like when I first started this show, I really wanted to bring awesome deals for great products like this to you, sleepy listener. And I didn't know where to start. So I just started doing all my marketing on my own. And it worked. But over the years, I got good enough at it where I now have people and tools to help me streamline that process and do all the legwork, leaving me more time to do the things I love in my life, like reading books to you. Shopify is one of those tools. It helps you run your business the right way so you can live your life the way you want. So upgrade your business and get the same checkout as some of the most successful companies in the world. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/Otis, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/OTIS to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/Otis. I'll have a link for this in the description of the show. And now, I would like to thank all of our brand new patrons on patreon.com, which is a website where you can go and pledge a couple bucks for an ad-free version of Sleepy. So this week's wonderful new patrons: Robin, Heather, Jack, G. Summers, Reed Van Mater, Eileen Rosen, Natasha Brack, Megan Daw, Timothy Frost, Barbara LaRiviere, Susan Collinson, Cameron, Rebecca Solonika, Mimi Johnson, Melanie Smith, Beth Howard, and Naomi Pretty. Thank you all so much for donating and being a part of making this show. It really means a lot. And if you don't know, all these names that I just read are brand new supporters of Sleepy on patreon.com, which is a website where you can pledge a couple bucks for an ad-free version of the show, or just give $1 to have your name read in the opening credits of the next Sunday show after you do. So if you would like to directly be a part of making this show that you listen to, go to patreon.com/sleepyradio. Thank you. And as always, the music you're hearing is by my good friend James Lepkowski, and the cover art for Sleepy is by Gracie Kanan. So tonight, I got another Christmas story for you, and it's by one of my favorite authors, L. Frank Baum, writer of The Wizard of Oz, and this is the life and adventures of Santa Claus. Kind of tells a story of Santa's humble beginnings, an origin story, if you will, and it's absolutely lovely. And if you like the story and don't immediately fall asleep to it, which I hope you do, just know that you can hear the entire book told chapter by chapter this month on the Daily Book Club, which is our sister podcast, and there's new episodes every single day, one chapter a day. So if you want to hear the rest of the story, go over there. But tonight, I hope you can sleep super soundly to this story of the life and adventures of Santa Claus by L. Frank Baum. And now is the time for you to fluff up your pillow just how you like it. Feel yourself melt into your bed. Get real comfortable. Close your eyes. And let me read to you. Youth, Chapter 1. Burzee. Have you heard of the great forest of Burzee? Nurse used to sing of it when I was a child. She sang of the big tree trunks standing close together, with their roots intertwining below the earth and their branches intertwining above it, of their rough coating of bark and queer gnarled limbs, of the bushy foliage that roofed the entire forest, save where the sunbeams found a path through which to touch the ground in little spots, and to cast weird and curious shadows over the mosses, the lichens, and the drifts of dried leaves. The forest of Burzee is mighty and grand and awesome to those who steal beneath its shade. Coming from the sunlit meadows into its mazes, it seems at first gloomy, then pleasant, and afterward filled with never-ending delights. For hundreds of years, it has flourished in all its magnificence, the silence of its enclosure unbroken, save by the chirp of busy chipmunks, the growl of wild beasts, and the songs of birds. Yet Burzee has its inhabitants. For all this, nature peopled it in the beginning with fairies, nooks, rills, and nymphs. As long as the forest stands, it will be a home, a refuge and a playground to these sweet immortals who revel undisturbed in its depths. Civilization has never yet reached Burzee. Will it ever, I wonder? Chapter 2. The Child of the Forest. Once so long ago, our great-grandfathers would have scarcely heard it mentioned. There lived within the great forest of Burzee a wood nymph named Necile. She was closely related to the mighty Queen Zurline, and her home was beneath the shade of a wide-spreading oak. Once every year, on budding day, when the trees put forth their new buds, Necile held the golden chalice of Ak to the lips of the queen, who drank therefrom to the prosperity of the forest. So you see, she was a nymph of some importance, and moreover, it is said she was highly regarded because of her beauty and grace. When she was created, she could not have told. Queen Zurline could not have told. The great Ak himself could not have told. It was long ago, when the world was new, and nymphs were needed to guard the forest and to minister to the wants of the young trees. Then, on some day not remembered, Necile sprang into being, radiant, lovely, straight and slim as the sapling she was created to guard. Her hair was the color that lines a chestnut burr. Her eyes were blue in the sunlight and purple in the shade. Her cheeks bloomed with the faint pink that edges the clouds at sunset. Her lips were full red, pouting and sweet. For costume, she adopted oak leaf green. All the wood nymphs dress in that color, and no other so desirable. Her dainty feet were sandal-clad, while her head remained bare of covering other than her silken tresses. Necile's duties were few and simple. She kept hurtful weeds from growing beneath her trees and sapping the earth food required by her charges. She frightened away the gadgulls, who took evil delight in flying against the tree trunks and wounding them so that they drooped and died from the poisonous contact. In dry season, she carried water from the brooks and pools and moistened the roots of her thirsty dependents. That was in the beginning. The weeds had now learned to avoid the forest where wood nymphs dwelt. The loathsome gadgulls no longer dared come nigh. The trees had become old and sturdy, and could bear the drought better than when fresh sprouted. So Necile's duties were lessened, and time grew laggard, while succeeding years became more tiresome and uneventful than the nymph's joyous spirit loved. Truly, the forest dwellers did not lack amusement. Each full moon, they danced in the royal circle of the queen. There were also the Feast of Nuts, the Jubilee of Autumn Tintings, the solemn ceremony of leaf shedding, and the revelry of Budding Day. But these periods of enjoyment were far apart and left many weary hours between. That a wood nymph should grow disconnected was not thought of by Necile's sisters. It came upon her only after many years of brooding. But when once she had settled in her mind that life was irksome, she had no patience with her condition, and longed to do something of real interest, and to pass her days in ways hitherto undreamed of by forest nymphs. The law of the forest alone restrained her from going forth in search of adventure. While this mood lay heavy upon pretty Necile, it chanced that the great Ak visited the forest of Burzee and allowed the wood nymphs, as their wont, to lie at his feet and listen to the words of wisdom that fell from his lips. Ak is the master woodman of the world. He sees everything and knows more than the sons of men. That night, he held the queen's hand, for he loved the nymphs as a father loves his children, and Necile lay at his feet with many of her sisters and earnestly hearkened as he spoke. "We lived so happily, my fair ones, in our forest glades," said I, stroking his grizzled beard thoughtfully, "that we know nothing of the sorrow and misery that fall to the lot of those poor mortals who inhabit the open spaces of the earth. They are not of our race, it is true, yet compassion well befits beings so fairly favored as ourselves. Often as I pass by the dwelling of some suffering mortal, I am tempted to stop and banish the poor thing's misery. Yet suffering, in moderation, is the natural lot of mortals. It is not our place to interfere with the laws of nature. Nevertheless," said the fair queen, nodding her golden head at the master woodsman, "it would not be a vain guess that Ak has often assisted these hapless mortals." Ak smiled. Sometimes, he replied, when they are very young, children, the mortals call them, I have stopped to rescue them from misery. The men and women I dare not interfere with. They must bear the burdens nature has imposed upon them. But the helpless infants, the innocent children of men, have a right to be happy until they become full grown and able to bear the trials of humanity. So I feel I am justified in assisting them. Not long ago, a year maybe, I found 4 poor children huddled in a wooden hut, slowly freezing. Their parents had gone to a neighboring village for food and left a fire to warm their little ones while they were absent. But a storm arose and drifted the snow in their path, so they were long on the road. Meantime, the fire went out, and the frost crept into the bones of the waiting children. Poor things, murmured the queen softly. What did he do? I called Nelko, bidding him to fetch wood from my forest and breathe upon it until the fire blazed again and warmed the little room where the children lay. Then they ceased shivering and fell asleep until their parents came. I'm glad you did thus, said the good queen, beaming upon the master. And Necile, who had eagerly listened to every word, echoed in a whisper, I, too, am glad. And this very night, continued Ak, as I came to the edge of Burzee, I heard a feeble cry, which I judged came from a human infant. I looked about me and found, close to the forest, a helpless babe, lying quite naked upon the grasses and wailing piteously. Not far away, screened by the forest, crouching Shiagra, the lioness, intent upon devouring the infant for her evening meal. And what did you do, Ak? Asked the queen, breathlessly. Not much, being in a hurry to greet my nymphs. But I commanded Shiagra to lie close to the babe and to give it her milk to quiet its hunger. And I told her to send word throughout the forest to all beasts and reptiles that the child should not be harmed. I am glad you did thus, said the queen again, in a tone of relief. But this time Necile did not echo her words, for the nymph, filled with a strange resolve, had suddenly stolen away from the group. Swiftly, her lithe form darted through the forest paths until she reached the edge of mighty Burzee, when she paused to gaze curiously about her. Never until now had she ventured so far, for the law of the forest had placed the nymphs in its utmost depths. Necile knew she was breaking the law, but the thought did not give pause to her dainty feet. She had decided to see with her own eyes this infant Ak had told her of, for she had never yet beheld a child of man. All the immortals are full grown. There are no children among them. Peering through the trees, Necile saw the child lying on the grass. But now it was sweetly sleeping, having been comforted by the milk drawn from Shiagra. It was not old enough to know what peril means. If it did not feel hunger, it was content. Softly, the nymph stole to the side of the babe and knelt upon the sward, her long robe of rose-leaf color spreading about her like a gossamer cloud. Her lovely countenance expressed curiosity and surprise, but, most of all, a tender, womanly pity. The babe was newborn, chubby and pink. It was entirely helpless. While the nymph gazed, the infant opened its eyes, smiled upon her, and stretched out two dimpled arms. In another instant, the seal had caught it to her breast and was hurrying with it through the forest paths. Chapter 3. The Adoption. The master woodsman suddenly rose, with knitted brows. "There is a strange presence in the forest," he declared. Then the queen and her nymphs turned and saw, standing before them, the seal, with the sleeping infant clasped tightly in her arms, and a defiant look in her deep blue eyes. And thus for a moment they remained. The nymphs filled with surprise and consternation, but the brow of the master woodsman gradually clearing as he gazed intently upon the beautiful immortal who had willfully broken the law. Then the great Ak, to the wonder of all, laid his hand softly on Necile's flowing locks and kissed her on her fair forehead. "For the first time within my knowledge," said he, gently, "the nymph has defied me and my laws. Yet in my heart can I find no word of chiding. What is your desire, Necile?" "Let me keep the child," she answered, beginning to tremble and falling on her knees in supplication. "Here in the forest of Burzee, where the human race has never yet penetrated?" questioned Ak. "Here in the forest of Burzee," replied the nymph, boldly. "It is my home, and I am weary for lack of occupation. Let me care for the babe. See how weak and helpless it is. Surely it cannot harm Burzee, nor the master woodsman of the world." "But the law, child, the law," cried Ak sternly. "The law is made by the master woodsman," returned Necile. "If he bids me care for the babe he himself has saved from death, who in all the world dare oppose me?" Queen Zurline, who had listened intently to this conversation, clapped her pretty hands gleefully at the nymph's answer. "You are fairly trapped, O Ak," she exclaimed, laughing. "Now, I pray you, give heed to Necile's petition." The woodsman, as was his habit when in thought, stroked his grizzled beard slowly. Then he said, "She shall keep the babe, and I will give it my protection. But I warn you all that as this is the first time I relax the law, so shall it be the last time. Nevermore, to the end of the world, shall a mortal be adopted by an immortal. Otherwise would we abandon our happy existence for one of trouble and anxiety. Good night, my nymphs." Then Ak was gone from their midst, and Necile hurried away to her bower to rejoice over her new-found treasure. Chapter 4. Claws. Another day found Necile's bower the most popular place in the forest. The nymphs clustered around her, and the child that lay asleep in her lap, with expressions of curiosity and delight. Nor were they wanting in praises for the great Ak's kindness in allowing Necile to keep the babe and to care for it. Even the queen came to peer into the innocent childish face and to hold a helpless, chubby fist in her own fair hand. "What shall we call him, Necile?" she asked, smiling. He must have a name, you know. Let him be called Claus, answered Necile, for that means a little one. Rather let him be called Neclaus, returned the queen, for that will mean Necile's little one. The nymphs clapped their hands in delight, and Neclaus became the infant's name, although Necile loved best to call him Claus, and in after days many of her sisters followed her example. Necile gathered the softest moss in all the forest for Claus to lie upon, and she made his bed in her own bower. Of food the infant had no lack. The nymphs searched the forest for bell udders, which grow upon the goa tree, and when opened are found to be filled with sweet milk. And soft-eyed does willingly gave a share of their milk to support the little stranger, while Shiegra, the lioness, often crept stealthily into Necile's bower and purred softly as she lay beside the babe and fed it. So the little one flourished and grew big and sturdy day by day, while Necile taught him to speak and to walk and to play. His thoughts and words were sweet and gentle, for the nymphs knew no evil, and their hearts were pure and loving. He became the pet of the forest, for Act's decree had forbidden beast or reptile to molest him, and he walked fearlessly wherever his will guided him. Presently, the news reached the other immortals that the nymphs of Burzee had adopted a human infant, and that the act had been sanctioned by the great Act. Therefore, many of them came to visit the little stranger, looking upon him with much interest. First the Rills, who are first cousins to the wood nymphs, although so differently formed. For the Rills are required to watch over the flowers and plants, as the nymphs watch over the forest and trees. They search the wide world for the food required by the roots of the flowering plants, while the brilliant colors possessed by the full-blown flowers are due to the dyes placed in the soil by the Rills, which are drawn through the little veins in the roots and the body of the plants as they reach maturity. The Rills are a busy people, for their flowers bloom and fade continually. They are merry and light-hearted, and are very popular with other mortals. Next came the Knooks, whose duty it is to watch over the beasts of the world, both gentle and wild. The Knooks have a hard time of it, since many of the beasts are ungovernable and rebel against restraint. But they know how to manage them, after all, and you will find that certain laws of the Knooks are obeyed by even the most ferocious animals. Their anxieties make the Knooks look old and worn and crooked, and their natures are a bit rough from associating with wild creatures continually. Yet they are most useful to humanity and to the world in general, as their laws are only laws the forest beasts recognize except those of the Master Woodsman. Then there were the fairies, the guardians of mankind, who were much interested in the adoption of Claus because their own laws forbade them to become familiar with their human charges. There are instances on record where the fairies have shown themselves to human beings and have even conversed with them. They are supposed to guard the lives of mankind, unseen and unknown, and if they favor some people more than others, it is because they have won such distinction fairly, as the fairies are very just and impartial. But the idea of adopting a child of men had never occurred to them because it was in every way opposed to their laws. So their curiosity was intense to behold the little stranger adopted by Necile and her sister nymphs. Claus looked upon the immortals who thronged around him with fearless eyes and smiling lips. He rode laughingly upon the shoulders of the merry rills. He mischievously pulled the gray beards of the low-browed knooks. He rested his curly head confidently upon the dainty bosom of the fairy queen herself. And the rills loved the sound of his laughter. The knooks loved his courage. The fairies loved his innocence. The boy made friends of all of them and learned to know their laws intimately. No forest flower was trampled beneath his feet, lest the friendly rill should be aggrieved. He never interfered with the beasts of the forest, lest his friends the knooks should become angry. The fairies he loved dearly, but knowing nothing of mankind, he could not understand that he was the only one of his race admitted to be friendly with them. Indeed, Claus came to consider that he alone, of all the forest people, had no like nor fellow. To him the forest was the world. He had no idea that millions of toiling, striving human creatures existed, and he was happy and content. Chapter 5. The Master Woodsman. Years pass swiftly in Burzee, for the nymphs have no need to regard time in any way. Even centuries make no change in the dainty creatures. Ever and ever they remain the same, immortal and unchanging. Claus, however, being mortal, grew to manhood day by day. Necile was disturbed presently to find him too big to lie in her lap, and he had a desire for other food than milk. His stout legs carried him far into Burzee's heart, where he gathered supplies of nuts and berries, as well as several sweet and wholesome roots, which suited his stomach better than the boludders. He sought Necile's bower less frequently, till finally it became his custom to return thither only to sleep. The nymph, who had come to love him dearly, was puzzled to comprehend the changed nature of her charge, and unconsciously altered her own mode of life to conform to his whims. She followed him readily through the forest paths, as did many of her sister nymphs, explaining as they walked all the mysteries of the gigantic wood and the habits and nature of the living things which dwelt beneath its shade. The language of the beasts became clear to the little Claus, but he never could understand their sulky and morose tempers. Only the squirrels, the mice, and the rabbits seemed to possess cheerful and merry natures, yet would the boy laugh when the panther growled, and stroke the bear's glossy coat while the creature snarled and bared its teeth menacingly. The growls and snarls were not for Claus, he well knew, though what did they matter? He could sing the songs of the bees, recite the poetry of the wood flowers, and relate the history of every blinking owl in Burzee. He helped the rills to feed their plants, and the knooks to keep order among the animals. The little immortals regarded him as a privileged person, being especially protected by Queen Zurline and her nymphs, and favored by the great Ak himself. One day the master woodsman came back to the forest of Burzee. He had visited in turn all his forests throughout the world, and there were many
and broad. Not until he entered the glade, where the queen and her nymphs were assembled to greet him, did Ak remember the child he had permitted Necile to adopt. Then he found, sitting familiarly in the circle of lovely immortals, a broad-shouldered, stalwart youth, who, when erect, stood fully as high as the shoulder of the master himself. Ak paused, silent and frowning, to bend his piercing gaze upon Claus. The clear eyes met his own steadfastly, and the woodsman gave a sigh of relief as he marked their placid depths and read the youth's brave and innocent heart. Nevertheless, as Ak sat beside the fair queen, and the golden chalice, filled with rare nectar, passed from lip to lip, the master woodsman was strangely silent and reserved, and stroked his beard many times with a thoughtful motion. With morning, he called Claus aside in kindly fashion, saying, "Bid goodbye for a time to Necile and her sisters, for you shall accompany me to my journey through the world." The venture pleased Claus, who knew well the honor of being companion of the master woodsman of the world. But Necile wept for the first time in her life, and clung to the boy's neck as if she could not bear to let him go. The nymph who had mothered this sturdy youth was still as dainty, as charming and beautiful as when she had dared to face Ak with the babe clasped to her breast. Nor was her love less great. Ak beheld the two clinging together, seemingly as brother and sister to one another, and again he wore his thoughtful look. Chapter 6. Claus discovers humanity. Taking Claus to a small clearing in the forest, the master said, "Place your hand upon my girdle and hold fast while we journey through the air, for now we shall encircle the world and look upon many of the haunts of those men from whom you are descended." These words caused Claus to marvel, for until now he had thought himself the only one of his kind upon the earth. Yet in silence he grasped firmly the girdle of the gray Ak, his astonishment forbidding speech. Then the vast forest of Burzee seemed to fall away from their feet, and the youth found himself passing swiftly through the air at a great height. Ere long, there were spires beneath them, while buildings of many shapes and colors met their downward view. It was a city of men, and Ak, pausing to descend, led Claus to its enclosure. Said the master, "So long as you hold fast to my girdle, you will remain unseen by all mankind, though seeing clearly yourself. To release your grasp will be to separate yourself forever from me and your home in Burzee. One of the first laws of the forest is obedience, and Claus had no thought of disobeying the master's wish. He clung fast to the girdle and remained invisible. Thereafter, with each moment passed in the city, the youth's wonder grew. He who had supposed himself created differently from all others now found the earth swarming with creatures of his own kind. "Indeed," said I, "the immortals are few, but the mortals are many." Claus looked earnestly upon his fellows. There were sad faces, gay and reckless faces, pleasant faces, anxious faces, and kindly faces, all mingled in puzzling disorder. Some worked at tedious tasks, some strutted in impudent conceit, some were thoughtful and grave, while others seemed happy and content. Men of many natures were there, as everywhere, and Claus found much to please him and much to make him sad. But especially he noted the children, first curiously, then eagerly, then lovingly. Ragged little ones rolled in the dust of the streets, playing with scraps and pebbles. Other children, gaily dressed, were propped upon cushions and fed with sugar plums. Yet the children of the rich were not happier than those playing with the dust and pebbles, it seemed to Claus. Childhood is the time of man's greatest content, said I, following the youth's thoughts. 'Tis during these years of innocent pleasure that the little ones are most free from care. Tell me, said Claus, why do not all these babies fare alike? Because they are born in both cottage and palace, returned the master. The difference in the wealth and the parents determines the lot of the child. Some are carefully tended and clothed in silks and dainty linen. Others are neglected and covered with rags. Yet all seem equally fair and sweet, said Claus thoughtfully. Well, they are babes, yes, agreed Ak. Their joy is in being alive, and they do not stop to think. In after years, the doom of mankind overtakes them, and they find they must struggle and worry, work and fret, to gain the wealth that is so dear to the hearts of men. Such things are unknown in the forest where you were reared. Claus was silent a moment. Then he asked, why was I reared in the forest, among those who are not of my race? Then Ak, in gentle voice, told him the story of his babyhood, how he had been abandoned at the forest edge and left a prey to wild beasts, and how the loving nymph Necile had rescued him and brought him to manhood under the protection of the immortals. Yet I am not of them, said Claus, musingly. You are not of them, returned the woodsman. The nymph who cared for you as a mother seems now like a sister to you. By and by, when you grow old and gray, she will seem like a daughter. Yet another brief span, and you will be but a memory, while she remains Necile. Then why, if man must perish, is he born? Demanded the boy. Everything perishes except the world itself and its keepers, answered Ak. But while life lasts, everything on earth has its use. The wise seek ways to be helpful to the world, for the helpful ones are sure to live again. Much of this Claus failed to understand fully, but a longing seized him to become helpful to his fellows, and he remained grave and thoughtful while they resumed their journey. They visited many dwellings of men in many parts of the world, watching farmers toil in the fields, warriors dash into cruel fray, and merchants exchange their goods for bits of white and yellow metal. And everywhere the eyes of Claus sought out the children in love and pity, for the thought of his own helpless babyhood was strong within him, and he yearned to give help to the innocent little ones of his race, even as he had been succored by the kindly nymph. Day by day, the master woodsman and his pupil traversed the earth, Ak speaking but seldom to the youth, who clung steadfastly to his girdle, but guiding him into all places where he might become familiar with the lives of human beings. And at last, they returned to the grand old forest of Burzee, where the master sat claws down within the circle of nymphs, among whom the pretty Necile anxiously awaited him. The brow of the great hag was now calm and peaceful, but the brow of Claus had become lined with deep thought. Necile sighed at the change in her foster son, who until now had ever been joyous and smiling. And the thought came to her that never again would the life of the boy be the same as before this eventful journey with the master.
Hey, so if you're listening to Sleepy, I know that you love podcasts that help you go to bed and get a great night's rest. Well, if you're looking for even more snoozy content, I highly encourage you to check out the podcast Nothing Much Happens by a sleep co-conspirator of mine named Catherine Nicolai. She shares these original, mindfully crafted, conflict-free literature designed to lull you into a restful slumber. For over 6 years, Catherine has been helping listeners find peace and rest through her soothing stories. The show has over 150 million downloads, and it basically is a grown-up version of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, filled with interconnected stories that soothe and calm you. It is a fantastic show, and she puts so much work into making stories that are specifically crafted to put you to bed. So definitely go check out her show, Nothing Much Happens. You can find Nothing Much Happens anywhere you get your podcasts. Sweet dreams. Hey, it's Otis here. Before we get to the bedtime reading, I wanted to let you know that I just launched a brand new show. It's called The Daily Book Club, a daytime companion to Sleepy, where you hear entire books one chapter at a time, one day at a time. Simple as that. So if Sleepy is how you wind down your day, The Daily Book Club is a great way to start your day. There's new episodes daily. I read in a slightly peppier voice so that you can get really lost in these amazing stories that have stood the test of time. Or, just like Sleepy, you can sit back and relax and zone out to a good book. The first book we'll be reading is The Enchanted April by Elizabeth von Arnim. Story is, in the 1920s, 4 women unfulfilled with life take a chance and abscond to a dreamy medieval Italian castle. It's a story dripping with wisteria, the beauty of solitude, and an unlikely pursuit of joy in Portofino, Italy. I think that this is a perfect story for the season, and you can hear it now. Find the Daily Book Club on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and everywhere else. This show has been a long time coming, and I'm so excited to bring you even more stories. So go subscribe to the Daily Book Club to hear what happens next. Thanks. Hey, my name's Otis Gray, and you're listening to Sleepy. A podcast where I read old books to help you get to sleep. It is almost Christmas time. I got another Christmas story for you tonight, which I'm very excited to read to you. And before we get to the bedtime reading, I just want to say that this episode is once again so proudly sponsored by Shopify. If you have a business, or if you've been wanting to start your own business, Shopify helps you do your thing. Nobody does it better. They have the most used checkout service on the planet. Their Shop Pay feature boosts conversions to 50%, meaning way less left in the cart and more sales for you. It is simply the best business behind the business, and it's a perfect partner no matter what stage your business is in. When I first started this show, I wanted to bring awesome deals for great products to Sleepy listeners, ones they'd actually use, and I didn't know where to start. So I just kind of started on my own, being my own marketing department, and over the years, I got good enough where now I have people and tools that help me streamline all that legwork, leaving me more time to do the things that I love in life, like reading these books to you. The Shopify is one of those tools. It helps you run your business the right way so you can live your life the way you want. So upgrade your business and get the same checkout as some of the most successful companies in the world. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/Otis, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/OTIS to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/Otis. I'll have a link for this in the show notes. And now, I'd like to profoundly thank all of our brand new patrons on patreon.com, which is a website where you can go and pledge a couple bucks for an ad-free version of Sleepy. So, this week's wonderful new patrons: Naomi, Claudia Porter, Jane Murphy, Marilyn Marks, C. Christie, Jess Auclair, Jean, Trisha, Kristen Mastantoni, Janet, and a big shout out to Sarah Rosa. Thank you so much for donating and being a part of making this show. It really means a lot. And for anyone who doesn't know, these names that I just read are brand new supporters of Sleepy on Patreon, which is a great site where you can support the people who make the stuff that you like directly. So if you would like to be a part of making the show in exchange for an ad-free version of Sleepy, or just having your name read in the opening credits of the show for just $1, you can go to patreon.com/sleepyradio. Thank you. And as always, the music you're hearing is by my good friend James Lepkowski, and the cover art for Sleepy is by Gracie Kanan. We only have a couple weeks till Christmas. Definitely feeling the Christmas spirit this year. December in New York is really fantastic. And I also got to go home for Thanksgiving, where it was snowing, and got to go cut down a Christmas tree in the woods behind my family home and bring it back here. And it's in my living room right now, all lit up. It's definitely one of those little Charlie Brown Christmas trees. It's only about 5 feet tall, and when they grow out in the woods, their branches are generally a lot less sparse than the ones that you'd get, kind of like a Christmas tree farm, or anyone selling them on the side of the streets or the roads. And I love my sparse little tree. So does my cat. She's tried to destroy it many times in the last couple weeks, which is par for the course. But it's still up somehow. And that is a Christmas gift in itself. Anyways, tonight, I have a lovely Christmas story for you that was on the show years back that I really love. And it is called The Mouse and the Moonbeam by Eugene Field. And now is the time for you to fluff up your pillow just how you like it. Feel yourself melt into your bed. Get real comfortable. Close your eyes and let me read to you. The Mouse and the Moonbeam. Whilst you were sleeping, little dear my soul, strange things happened. But that I saw and heard them, I should never have believed them. The clock stood, of course, in the corner. A moonbeam floated idly on the floor, and a little mauve mouse came from the hole in the chimney corner and frisked and scampered in the light of the moonbeam upon the floor. The little mauve mouse was particularly merry. Sometimes she danced upon 2 legs and sometimes upon 4 legs, but always very daintily and always very merrily. Ah me, sighed the old clock, how different mice are nowadays from the mice we used to have in the good old times. Now, there was your grandma, Mistress Velvet Paw, and there was your grandpa, Master Sniff Whisker. How grave and dignified they were. Many a night have I seen them dancing upon the carpet below me, but always the stately minuet and never that crazy frisking which you are executing now, to my surprise. Yes, and to my horror too. But why shouldn't I be merry? Asked the little mauve mouse. Tomorrow is Christmas, and this is Christmas Eve. So it is, said the old clock. I had really forgotten all about it. But tell me, what is Christmas to you, little Miss Mauve Mouse? A great deal to me, cried the little Mauve Mouse. I have been very good a very long time. I have not used any bad words, nor have I gnawed any holes, nor have I stolen any canary seed, nor have I worried my mother by running behind the flour barrel where that horrid trap is set. In fact, I have been so good that I'm very sure Santa Claus will bring me something very pretty. This seemed to amuse the old clock mightily. In fact, the old clock fell to laughing so heartily that in an unguarded moment she struck 12 instead of 10, which was exceedingly careless, and therefore to be reprehended. Why, you silly little mauve mouse, said the old clock. You don't believe in Santa Claus, do you? Of course I do, answered the little mauve mouse. Believe in Santa Claus? Why shouldn't I? Didn't Santa Claus bring me a beautiful butter cracker last Christmas, and a lovely ginger snap, and a delicious rind of cheese, and lots of things? I should be very ungrateful if I did not believe in Santa Claus, and I certainly shall not disbelieve in him at the very moment when I am expecting him to arrive with a bundle of goodies for me. Tomorrow is Christmas, and this is Christmas Eve. I once had a little sister, continued the little mauve mouse, who did not believe in Santa Claus, and the very thought of the fate that befell her makes my blood run cold and my whiskers stand on end. She died before I was born, but my mother has told me all about her. Perhaps you never saw her. Her name was Squeaknibble, and she was in stature one of those long, low, rangy mice that are seldom found in well-stocked pantries. Mother says that Squeaknibble took after our ancestors who came from New England, where the malignant ingenuity of the people and the ferocity of the cats rendered life precarious indeed. Squeaknibble seemed to inherit many ancestral traits, the most conspicuous of which was a disposition to sneer at some of the most respected dogmas in mousedom. From her very infancy, she doubted, for example, the widely accepted theory that the moon was composed of green cheese, and this heresy was the first intimation that her parents had of the skeptical turn of her mind. Of course, her parents were vastly annoyed, for their mature natures saw that this youthful skepticism portended serious, if not fatal, consequences. Yet all in vain did the sagacious couple reason and plead with their headstrong and heretical child. For a long time, Squeaknibble would not believe that there was any such archfiend as a cat, but she came to be convinced to the contrary one memorable night, on which occasion she lost 2 inches of her beautiful tail and received so terrible a fright that for fully an hour afterward Her little heart beat so violently as to lift her off her feet and bump her head against the top of our domestic hole. The cat that deprived my sister of so large a percentage of her vertebral colophon was the same brindled ogress that nowadays steals ever and anon into this room, crouches treacherously behind the sofa, and feigns to be asleep, hoping, forsooth, that some of us, heedless of her hated presence, will venture within reach of her diabolical claws. So enraged was this ferocious monster at the escape of my sister that she ground her fangs viciously together and vowed to take no pleasure in life until she held in her devouring jaws the innocent little mouse which belonged to the mangled bit of tail she even then clutched in her remorseless paws. "Yes," said the old clock. "Now that you recall the incident, I recollect it as well. I was here then, in this very corner, and I remember that I laughed at the cat and chided her for her awkwardness. My reproaches irritated her. She told me that a clock's duty was to run itself down, not to be deprecating the merits of others. Yes, I recall the time. That cat's tongue is fully as sharp as her claws." "Be that as it may," said the little mauve mouse, "it is a matter of history, and therefore beyond dispute, that from that very moment the cat pined for Squeaknibble's life. It seemed as if that one little 2-inch taste of Squeaknibble's tail had filled the cat with a consuming passion or appetite for the rest of Squeaknibble. So the cat waited and watched and hunted and schemed and devised and did everything possible for a cat, a cruel cat, to do in order to gain her murderous ends. One night, one fatal Christmas Eve, our mother had undressed the children for bed and was urging upon them to go to sleep earlier than usual, since she fully expected that Santa Claus would bring each of them something very palatable and nice before morning. Thereupon the little dears whisked their cunning tails, pricked up their beautiful ears, and began telling one another what they hoped Santa Claus would bring. One asked for a slice of Roquefort, another for Neufchâtel, another for Sapsago, and a fourth for Edam. One expressed a preference for de Brie, while another hoped to get Parmesan. One clamored for imperial blue Stilton, and another craved the fragrant boon of Caprara. There were 14 little ones then, and consequently there were diverse opinions as to the kind of gift which Santa Claus should best bring. Still, there was, as you can readily understand, an enthusiastic unanimity upon this point, namely that the gift should be cheese of some brand or other. "My dears," said our mother, "what matters it whether the boon which Santa Claus brings be Royal English cheddar, or fromage de Bric-Quebec, Vermont sage, or Herkimer County skim milk? We should be content with whatsoever Santa Claus bestows, so long as it be cheese, disjoined from all traps whatsoever, unmixed with Paris green, and free from glass, strychnine, and other harmful ingredients. As for myself, I shall be satisfied with a cut of nice, fresh Western Reserve, for truly I recognize in no other viand or edible half the fragrance or half the gustfulness to be met within one of these pale but aromatic domestic products. So run away to your dreams now, that Santa Claus may find you sleeping. The children obeyed, all but Squeak Nibble. Let the others think what they please, said she, but I don't believe in Santa Claus. I'm not going to bed either. I'm going to creep out of this dark hole and have a quiet romp all by myself in the moonlight. Oh, what a vain, foolish, wicked little mouse was Squeak Nibble. But I will not reproach the dead. Her punishment came all too swiftly. Now listen. Who do you suppose overheard her talking so disrespectfully of Santa Claus? Why, Santa Claus himself, said the old clock. Oh no, answered the little moth mouse. It was that wicked, murderous cat. Just as Satan lurks and lies in wait for bad children, so does the cruel cat lurk and lie in wait for naughty little mice. And you can depend upon it that when that awful cat heard Squeak Nibble speak so disrespectfully of Santa Claus, her wicked eyes glowed with joy, her sharp teeth watered, and her bristling fur emitted electric sparks as big as marrow-fat peas. Then, what did that bloodthirsty monster do but scuttle as fast as she could into Dear My Soul's room, leap up into Dear My Soul's crib, and walk off with the pretty little white muff which Dear My Soul used to wear when she went for a visit to the little girl in the next block. What upon earth did the horrid old cat want with Dear My Soul's pretty little white muff? Ah, the duplicity, the diabolical ingenuity of that cat. Listen. In the first place, resumed the little moth mouse, after a pause that testified eloquently to the depth of her emotion. In the first place, that wretched cat dressed herself up in that pretty little white muff, by which you are to understand that she crawled through the muff just so far as to leave her 4 cruel legs at liberty. Yes, I understand, said the old clock. Then she put on the boy doll's fur cap, said the little moth mouse. And when she was arrayed in the boy doll's fur cap and Dear My Soul's pretty little white muff, of course she didn't look like a cruel cat at all. But whom did she look like? Like the boy doll, suggested the old clock. No, no, cried the little moth mouse. Like Dear My Soul? Asked the old clock. How silly you are, exclaimed the little moth mouse. Why, she looked like Santa Claus, of course. Oh, yes, I see, said the old clock. Now I begin to be interested. Go on. Alas, sighed the little moth mouse, not much remains to be told. But there is more of my story left than there was of Squeak Nibble when that horrid cat crawled out of that miserable disguise. You are to understand that, contrary to her sagacious mother's injunction and in the notorious derision of the mooted coming of Santa Claus, Squeak Nibble issued from the friendly hole in the chimney corner and gamboled about over this very carpet, and I dare say, in this very moonlight. I do not know, said the moonbeam faintly. I am so very old, and I have seen so many things. I do not know. Right merrily was Squeak Nibble gamboling, continued the little mouse, and she had just turned a double-back somersault without the use of what remained of her tail, when, all of a sudden, she beheld, looming up like a monster ghost, a figure all in white fur. Oh, how frightened she was, and how her little heart did beat. Purr, purr, said the ghost in white fur. Oh, please don't hurt me, pleaded Squeak Nibble. No, I'll not hurt you, said the ghost in white fur. I'm Santa Claus, and I've brought you a beautiful piece of savory old cheese, you dear little mousey, you. Poor Squeak Nibble was deceived. A skeptic all her life, she was at last befooled by the most palpable and most fatal of frauds. How good of you, said Squeak Nibble. I didn't believe there was a Santa Claus, and... But before she could say more, that was the last of Squeak Nibble. I can dwell no longer upon this harrowing scene. Suffice it to say that ere the morrow's sun rose like a big yellow Herkimer County cheese upon the spot where the tragedy had been enacted, poor Squeak Nibble passed to that bourne whence 2 inches of her beautiful tail had preceded her by the space of 3 weeks to a day. As for Santa Claus, when he came that Christmas Eve, bringing morceau de brie and of Stilton for the other little mice, he heard with sorrow Squeak Nibble's fate, and ere he departed, he said that in all his experience he had never known of a mouse or of a child that had prospered after once saying he didn't believe in Santa Claus. Well, that is a remarkable story, said the old clock. But if you believe in Santa Claus, why aren't you in bed? That's where I shall be presently, answered the little mouse. But I must have my scamper, you know. It is very pleasant, I assure you, to frolic in the light of the moon. Only I cannot understand why you are always so cold and so solemn and so still, you pale, pretty little moonbeam. Indeed, I do not know that I am so, said the moonbeam. But I am very old, and I have traveled many, many leagues, and I have seen wondrous things. Sometimes I toss upon the ocean. Sometimes I fall upon a slumbering flower. Sometimes I rest upon a child's face. I see the fairies at their play, and I hear mothers singing lullabies. Last night I swept across the frozen bosom of a river. A woman's face looked up at me. It was the picture of eternal rest. She is sleeping, said the frozen river. I rock her to and fro and sing to her. Pass gently by, O moonbeam. Pass gently by, lest you awaken her. How strangely you talk, said the old clock. Now, I'll warrant me that, if you wanted to, you could tell many a pretty and wonderful story. You must know many a Christmas tale. Pray, tell us one to wear away this night of Christmas watching. I know but one, said the moonbeam. I have told it over and over again, in every land and in every home, yet I do not weary of it. It is very simple. Should you like to hear it? Indeed we should, said the old clock. But before you begin, let me strike 12, for I shouldn't want to interrupt you. When the old clock had performed this duty with somewhat more than usual alacrity, the moonbeam began its story. Upon a time so long that I can't tell how long ago it was, I fell upon a hillside. It was in a far distant country. This I know, because although it was the Christmas time, it was not in that country as it wont to be in countries to the north. Hither the Snow King never came. Flowers bloomed all the year, and at all times the lambs found pleasant pasturage on the hillsides. The night wind was balmy, and there was a fragrance of cedar in its breath. There were violets on the hillside, and I fell amongst them and lay there. I kissed them, and they awakened. Ah, is it you, little moonbeam? They said, and they nestled in the grass which the lambs had left uncropped. A shepherd lay upon a broad stone on the hillside. Above him spread an olive tree, old, ragged, and gloomy. But now it swayed its rusty branches majestically in the shifting air of night. The shepherd's name was Benoni. Wearied with long watching, he had fallen asleep. His crook had slipped from his hand. Upon the hillside, too, slept the shepherd's flock. I had counted them again and again. I had stolen across their gentle faces and brought them pleasant dreams of green pastures and of cool water brooks. I had kissed old Benoni, too, as he lay slumbering there, and in his dreams he seemed to see Israel's king come upon earth, and in his dreams he murmured the promised Messiah's name. Ah, is it you, little moonbeam? Quoth the violets. You have come in good time. Nestle here with us and see wonderful things come to pass. What are these wonderful things of which you speak? I asked. We heard the old olive tree telling of them tonight, said the violets. Do not go to sleep, little violets, said the old olive tree, for this is Christmas night, and the Master shall walk upon the hillside in the glory of the midnight hour. So we waited and watched. One by one the lambs fell asleep. One by one the stars peeped out. The shepherd nodded and crooned and nodded. And at last he too went fast asleep, and his crook slipped from his keeping. Then we called to the old olive tree yonder, asking how soon the midnight hour would come. But all the old olive tree answered was, presently, presently. And finally, we too fell asleep, wearied by our long watching and lulled by the rocking and swaying of the old olive tree in the breezes of the night. But who is this master? I asked. A child, a little child, they answered. He is called the Little Master by the others. He comes here often and plays among the flowers of the hillside. Sometimes the lambs, gamboling too carelessly, have crushed and bruised us so that we lie bleeding, then are like to die. But the little Meister heals our wounds and refreshes us once again. I marveled much to hear these things. The midnight hour is at hand, said I, and I will abide you to see this little master of whom you speak. So we nestled among the verdure of the hillside and sang songs to one another. Come away, called the night wind. I know a beauteous sea not far hence, upon whose bosom you shall float away out into the mists and clouds, if you will come with me. But I hid under the violets and amid the tall grass, that the night wind might not woo me with its pleading. Ho there, old olive tree, cried the violets. Do you see the little master coming? Is it not the midnight hour at hand? I can see the town yonder, said the old olive tree. A star beams bright over Bethlehem. The iron gates swing open, and the little master comes. Two children came to the hillside. The one, older than his comrade, was Demas, the son of Benoni. He was rugged and sinewy, and over his brown shoulders was flung a goatskin. A leathern cap did not confine his long, dark, curly hair. The other child was he whom they called the Little Master. About his slender form clung raiment white as snow, and around his face of heavenly innocence fell curls of golden yellow. So beautiful a child I had not seen before, nor have I ever seen such as he. And as they came together to the hillside, there seemed to glow about the little master's head a soft white light, as if the moon had sent its tenderest, fairest beams to kiss those golden curls. What sound was that? Cried Demas, for he was exceeding fearful. Have no fear, Demas, said the little master. Give me thy hand, and I will lead thee. Presently, they came to the rock whereon Benoni, the shepherd, lay, and they stood under the old olive tree. And the old olive tree swayed no longer in the night wind, but bent its branches reverently in the presence of the little master. It seemed as if the wind, too, stayed in its shifting course just then, for suddenly there was a solemn hush, and you could hear no noise, except that in his dreams Benoni spoke the Messiah's name. Thy father sleeps, said the little master, and it is all well that it is so, for that I love thee, Demas, and thou shalt walk with me in my Father's kingdom. I would show thee the glories of my birthright. Then all at once, sweet music filled the air, and light, greater than the light of day, illumined the sky and fell upon all that hillside. The heavens opened, and angels, singing joyous songs, walked to the earth. More wondrous still, the stars falling from their places in the sky clustered upon the old olive tree and swung hither and thither like colored lanterns. The flowers of the hillside all awakened, and they too danced and sang. The angels, coming hither, hung gold and silver and jewels and precious stones upon the olive grove, where swung the stars, so that the glory of that sight, though I might live forever, I shall never see again. When Demas heard and saw these things, he fell upon his knees, and catching the hem of the little master's garment, he kissed it. Greater joy than this shall be thine, Demas, said the little master. But first must all things be fulfilled. All through that Christmas night did the angels come and go with their sweet anthems. All through that Christmas night did the stars dance and sing. And when it came my time to steal away, the hillside was still beautiful with the glory and the music of heaven. Well, is that all? Asked the clock. No, said the moonbeam, but I am nearly done. The years went on. Sometimes I tossed upon the ocean's bosom. Sometimes I scampered o'er the battlefield. Sometimes I lay upon a child's face. I heard the voices of darkness and mothers' lullabies and sick men's prayers, and so the years went on. I fell one night upon a hard and furrowed face. It was of ghostly pallor. A thief was dying on the cross, and this was his face. About the cross stood men with staves and swords and spears, but none paid heed unto the thief. Somewhat beyond this cross another was lifted up, and upon it stretched a body my light fell not upon. But I heard a voice that somewhere I had heard before, though where I did not know. And this voice blessed those railed and jeered and shamefully entreated. And suddenly the voice called, Demas, Demas. And the thief upon whose hardened face I rested made answer. Then I saw it was Demas. Yet to this wicked criminal there remained but little of the shepherd child whom I had seen in all his innocence upon the hillside. Long years of sinful life had seared their marks into his face. Yet now, at the sound of that familiar voice, somewhat of the old-time boyish look came back, and in the yearning of the anguished eyes, I seemed to see the shepherd's son again. The master, cried Demas, and he stretched forth his neck, that he might see him that spake. O Demas, how art thou changed, cried the master. Yet there was in his voice no tone of rebuke, save that which cometh of love. Then Demas wept, and in that hour he forgot his pain, and the master's consoling voice and the master's presence there wrought in the dying criminal such a new spirit that when at last his head fell upon his bosom, and the men about the cross said that he had passed, it seemed as if I shined not upon a felon's face, but upon the face of the gentle shepherd lad, the son of Benoni. And shining on that peaceful face, I bethought me of the little master's words that he had spoken under the old olive tree upon the hillside. Your eyes behold the promised glory now, O Demas, I whispered, for with the master you walk in paradise. Ah, little dear my soul, you know whereof the moonbeams spake. The shepherd's bones are dust, the flocks are scattered, the old olive tree is gone, the flowers of the hillside are withered, and none knoweth where the grave of Demas is made. But last night, again, there shined a star over Bethlehem, and the angels descended from the sky to earth, and the stars sang together in glory. And the bells, hear them, little dear my soul, how sweetly they are ringing. The bells bear us the good tidings of great joy this Christmas morning, that our Christ is born, and that with him he bringeth peace on earth and goodwill toward men.
Hey, so if you're listening to Sleepy, I know that you love podcasts that help you go to bed and get a great night's rest. Well, if you're looking for even more snoozy content, I highly encourage you to check out the podcast Nothing Much Happens by a sleep co-conspirator of mine named Catherine Nicolai. She shares these original, mindfully crafted, conflict-free literature designed to lull you into a restful slumber. For over 6 years, Catherine has been helping listeners find peace and rest through her soothing stories. The show has over 150 million downloads, and it basically is a grown-up version of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, filled with interconnected stories that soothe and calm you. It is a fantastic show, and she puts so much work into making stories that are specifically crafted to put you to bed. So definitely go check out her show, Nothing Much Happens. You can find Nothing Much Happens anywhere you get your podcasts. Sweet dreams.
Imagine unlocking a version of yourself that's unstoppable, where mental barriers no longer hold you back. Listen to Mentally Stronger with me, Amy Morin, therapist and international best-selling author, here to guide you on a journey to reaching your greatest potential. Every Monday, I bring you into conversations with some of the most fascinating minds. Experts, authors, entrepreneurs, athletes, and musicians. They don't just share stories. They reveal the mental strategies that propelled them to the top. But here's the real magic. At the end of each episode, I break down their wisdom into practical therapist-approved advice. In my solo episodes, I dive deep into the techniques that build mental strength. It's like having your own personal therapy session as you discover how to turn these insights into steps you can take right now. This podcast isn't just for those facing mental health challenges. It's for anyone who wants to push their limits, achieve peak performance, and truly thrive. Are you ready to unlock your full potential? Then it's time to become mentally stronger. Subscribe to Mentally Stronger with therapist Amy Morin, available wherever you love to listen to podcasts.
Hey, my name's Otis Gray, and you're listening to Sleepy. A podcast where I read old books to help you get to sleep. And this is a midweek Christmas short story for you. It is getting closer to Christmas, and I have a lovely little tale here for you by none other than Hans Christian Andersen. And before we get to the bedtime reading, just want to generally thank all of our patrons on patreon.com. You are amazing. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And if you're not a patron and don't know what it is,
Patreon is just this wonderful website where you can give back to the people who make the stuff that you like. So if you listen to Sleepy and you want to give $1 or even $2 to the show, you can do that this Christmas season by going to patreon.com/sleepyradio. At $2, you get an ad-free version of the show in exchange. But even if you donate $1, I will read your name in the opening credits of the next show after you do, and I would love to do that. So if you want to be a part of making the show, go to patreon.com/sleepyradio. Thank you. And as always, the music you're hearing is by my good friend James Lepkowski, and the cover art for Sleepy is by Gracie Kana. Well, it's getting closer to Christmas. Today is December 11th, and I have a story that I have never read before, which is The Fir Tree by Hans Christian Andersen. Andersen, of course, is the original author of The Little Mermaid and the tale that inspired Frozen. So many other short stories that have become just emblematic of literature and have found their way into pop culture today. He was extremely prolific, and this is one of his Christmas stories. With all Hans Christian Andersen stories, the end seems to be generally not as pleasant and charming as the beginning. It's kind of, I would say, one of his trademarks. But still, it is a wonderful little Christmas tale with a undoubtedly lovely message. And it's also written for any ages, so it is definitely one to be read out loud and one that is great to fall asleep to. So tonight, I hope you can sleep soundly to this little story of The Fir Tree by Hans Christian Andersen. And now is the time for you to fluff up your pillow just how you like it. Feel yourself melt into your bed. Get real comfortable. Close your eyes. And let me read to you. But in the forest, there grew a pretty little fir tree. It had a good place of its own. It could get sunshine, it had plenty of air, and round it grew numbers of larger comrades, both firs and pines. But the little fir was in a hurry to grow. It didn't care about the warm sun or the cool air. It took no notice of the village children who came and chattered when they were out gathering strawberries and raspberries. They often came there with jugs full of them, or with strawberries strung on straw, and would sit down by the little tree and say, "Look how pretty and little it is," which the tree didn't at all like to hear. Next year it was bigger, by quite a length of stem, and the year after by a yet longer growth. For on a fir tree you can always see how many years old it is by the number of joints it has. "Oh, if I were only a big tree like the others," sighed the little tree. "Then I could spread my branches far out round me and look out into the wide world with my top. The birds would build nests among my branches, and when the wind blew, I could make stately boughs like the others there. And it took no pleasure in the sunshine or the birds or the red clouds that sailed over it, morning and evening. When it was winter, and the snow lay sparkling white all round, a hare would often come bounding along and jump over the little tree. And oh, it was annoyed. But 2 winters passed, and by the 3rd, the tree was so big that the hare had to run around it. Oh, to grow, and to be big and old. That was the only pleasant thing in the world, the tree thought. Every spring, the woodcutters came and felled some of the largest trees. This happened every year, and the young fir, who was by this time well grown, shuddered at it. For the great stately trees fell with a crash and a smash, and when their branches were cut off, they looked all naked and long and slender. They could hardly be recognized. Then they were loaded onto wagons and drawn off out of the forest by horses. Where were they going, and what awaited them? In spring, when the swallow and the stork came, the tree asked them, "Do you know where they were taken to? Haven't you met them?" The swallows knew nothing, but the stork looked thoughtful and then nodded and said, "Yes, I think so. I met a lot of new ships when I set out from Egypt, and on those ships were fine masts. I dare say it was them. They smelt of pine. Many's the time I salute them. They carry their heads high, that they do." Oh, I do wish I was big enough to fly over the sea, too. What sort of thing is the sea really, and what does it look like? "Oh, that's a long affair to explain," said the stork, and walked off. "You should rejoice in your youth," said the sunbeams. "Rejoice in your strong growth and young life that's in you." And the wind kissed the tree, and the dew shed tears on it, but the fir didn't understand that at all. When Christmas time drew near, some quite young trees were felled, trees many of which were not so big or so old as this fir, who could have neither peace nor quiet, but always wanting to be off. These young trees, and they were always the prettiest, always kept their branches, and they were laid on wagons and drawn out of the forest by horses. "Where are they going?" asked the fir. "They're no bigger than me. In fact, one of them was much smaller. Why do they all keep their branches? Where are they being driven?" We know, twittered the gray sparrows. "Down in the town we've peeped in at the window panes. We know where they're being driven to. Why, they come in for the greatest brilliance and glory you can imagine. We've peeped in at windows and seen how they're planted in the middle of a warm room and decked out with the most lovely things. Gilded apples, gingerbread cakes, toys, and hundreds of lights." "And then?" asked the fir, quivering through all of its branches. "And then, what happens then?" Why, we didn't see any more, but it was marvelous. "Can I be destined to go by that radiant path?" said the tree, exulting. "That's even better than faring over the sea. I am sick with longing. If only it was Christmas. I am quite as tall, and stretch out far now as those others that were being carried off last year. Oh, to be on the wagon, to be in the warm room with all the splendor and magnificence. And then, why, then will come something still better, still more beautiful. Or else why should they deck me out like that? There must be something still greater, still nobler. But what? Oh, how I suffer and yearn. I don't know myself what's the matter with me." "Rejoice in me," said the breeze and the sunshine. "Rejoice in your fresh youth out here in the free air." But it wouldn't rejoice. It grew and grew. In winter and summer, it stood there in green. In dark green there it stood, and people who saw it said, "That's a fine tree." And at Christmas time, it was the first of all to be felled. The axe cut deep through its marrow, and the tree fell over onto the ground with a sigh. It felt a pang and a weakness, and couldn't think at all of coming happiness. So sorrowful was it at being parted from its home, from the spot on which it had grown up. It knew it would never again see the dear old companions, the little bushes and flowers about it. No, not even the birds, perhaps. The journey was by no means agreeable. The tree came to itself only when it was unloaded with other trees in the yard and heard someone say, "That's a fine one. We don't want anything better than that." 2 servants in gay livery came out and carried the fur into a large, handsome drawing room. All around the walls hung portraits, and beside the large stove were Chinese vases with lions on their covers. There were rocking chairs, silk-covered sofas, large tables covered with picture books, and more than 100 times 100 rix dollars worth of toys. At least, so said the children. And the fur was set up in a big tub filled with sand, but nobody could see what was in the tub, for green stuff was draped all about it, and it stood on a large, many-colored carpet. Oh, how the tree quivered. What was going to happen? Servants and young ladies came and decked it out. On the branches they hung little nets cut out of colored paper, and every net was filled with sweetmeats. Gilded apples and walnuts were hung on it, looking as if they had grown there. And more than 100 little tapers, red, blue, and white, were stuck upon the branches. Dolls that looked exactly like people. The tree had never seen the like of them, swung to and fro amid the green, and at the very top was fashioned a large star of gold leaf. It was splendid, splendid beyond compare. Tonight, they all said, tonight, it'll shine all right. Oh, thought the tree, if it were only night, if only the candles were lit. And what'll happen then? Will the trees come out of the forest and look at me? Will the sparrows fly to the window panes? Shall I grow here always and be decked out in the winter and summer too? Ah, it was full of it all, but it had a terrible backache from pure longing, and backache is every bit as painful for a tree as headache is for the rest of us. Then the candles were lit. Oh, the brilliance and the glory. It made the tree quiver through every branch, till one of the candles set fire to a sprig, and it smoked furiously. Help, help, screamed the girls, and hastened to put it out. After this, the tree durst not quiver. What a turn it had got. It was terribly afraid of losing any of its finery, and quite bewildered with all the splendor. And now the folding doors were thrown open, and in rushed a crowd of children, fit to throw the tree right down. The elders followed sedately. The little ones stood dumb, for a moment only. Then they shouted for joy till the room rang again, and danced round the tree, while one present after another was pulled off it. What's this they're doing, thought the tree. What's going to happen? The candles burnt down to the branches, and as they did, so they were put out, and then the children were allowed to plunder the tree. Why, how they rushed upon it, till the branches cracked. If it hadn't been tied so fast to the ceiling by the top and the gold star, it would have been tumbled right over. The children danced round about with their beautiful toys, and nobody looked at the tree except the old nurse, who went about peering among the branches, but that was only to see if a fig or an apple had been missed. A story, cried the children, as they dragged a stout little man towards the tree. He sat himself down beneath it. Now we're on the green, said he, and it'll be very good for the tree to listen to. But I'm only going to tell one story. Will you have the one about Ivy Daved, or the one about Humpty Dumpty, who tumbled downstairs and yet got up to the throne and married the princess? Ivy Daved, cried some of them. Humpty Dumpty, cried the others. There was a deal of shrieking and screaming, and only the fur kept quiet and thought, aren't I to take any part or do anything at all? Well, it had taken part. It had done what it was meant to do. So the man told the story of Humpty Dumpty, who tumbled downstairs, and after all got to the throne and married the princess. And the children clapped their hands and cried, Go on, go on. They wanted a vie de vet as well, but they only got Humpty Dumpty. The fir stood there quite still and full of thought. Never had the birds in the forest told such tales as this. Humpty Dumpty tumbled downstairs, and yet married the princess. Yes, yes, that's the way things go in the world, thought the fir, and believed it was all true. The man who told the story was so nice. Yes, yes, who can tell? Perhaps I shall tumble downstairs too, and marry a princess. So it enjoyed itself with thinking of the next day, and of being dressed out with candles and toys and gold and fruit. Tomorrow I won't shiver, it thought. I'll enjoy myself properly with all my finery. Tomorrow I shall hear the story of Humpty Dumpty over again, and perhaps the one about a vie de vet. All night the tree stood still and thought. Next morning, in came the men and the maids. Now the dressing will begin again, thought the tree. But they dragged it out of the room and upstairs into a loft, and there put away in a dark corner where no daylight came. What's the meaning of this, thought the tree. What am I to do here? What can I listen to here? I leaned up against the wall and stood there, thinking. It had plenty of time for that, for days and nights passed by, and no one came up there. And when somebody did come out at last, it was only to stow away some big boxes in the corner. The tree was quite hidden up. You might have thought it was clean forgotten. It's winter outside now, thought the tree. The ground is hard and covered with snow. The people couldn't plant me now, so I shall stay here under cover till spring. What a good plan that is. Lord, how kind the people are. I only wish it wasn't quite so dark and so frightfully lonely here. There's not even a little hare. It was very pleasant after all, out there in the forest. Yes, even when he jumped over me. Though I didn't like that at the time. Frightfully lonely it is up here, to be sure. At that moment, a little mouse said, "Pee, pee," and came stealing out, and then another little one. They sniffed at the fir and ran about among its branches. "It's horribly cold," said the little mice. "But for all that it's a delightful place, isn't it, old fir?" "I'm not old at all," said the fir. "There are a lot who are much older than me." "Where do you come from?" asked the mice. "And what do you know about?" Indeed, they were dreadfully inquisitive. "Do tell us about the loveliest place in the world. Have you ever been there? Have you ever been in the storeroom, where there are cheeses lying on the shelves and bacon hanging from the ceiling, and where you can dance on the tallow candles and go in thin, come out fat?" "No, I don't know about that," said the tree. "But I know the place where the sun shines and the birds sing." And with that, it told them all its story from its youth up, and the little mice never heard anything of the kind before, and they listened most attentively and said, "Dear me, what a lot you've seen, and how happy you've been." "I," said the fir, and began thinking over what it had told them. Yes, after all, those were merry days. And then it told them about Christmas Eve, when it had been decked out with cakes and candles. "Oh," said the little mice, "how happy you have been, old fir." "I'm not old at all," said the tree. "It was only winter when I came out of the forest. I'm in the prime of my life. I've hardly begun to grow properly." "What lovely stories you do tell," said the little mice. And the next day came with 4 more little mice who wanted to hear the tree tell stories. And the more it told, the more plainly it remembered it all itself, and thought, "Those were very merry days, to be sure, and they may come again. they may. Humpty Dumpty tumbled downstairs, and yet married the princess. Perhaps I too shall get a princess. And then the fir remembered a very pretty little birch tree that grew in the forest, and to it she seemed like a real beautiful princess. "Who's Humpty Dumpty?" the little mice asked, and it told them the whole story, for it could recollect every single word of it. And the little mice were fit to jump to the very top of the tree with delight. Next night, a great many more mice came, and on Sunday 2 rats besides. But the rats said the story did not amuse them, and that it disappointed the little mice, for it made them think less of it. "So that's the only story you know?" asked the rats. "That's the only one," the tree replied. "I heard of it on the happiest evening of my life, but at the time I didn't think how happy I was." "Well, it's an extraordinarily poor story. Don't you know one with bacon and tallow candles in it? Haven't you any more storeroom stories?" "No," said the tree. "Oh well, much obliged, I'm sure," said the rats, and went off home. At last the small mice stopped away too, and then the tree said with a sigh, "It was very nice, so it was, when they sat around me, those nimble little mice, and listened to my stories. Now that's past and gone too. But I must remember to enjoy myself when I'm taken out again." But when did that happen? Why, it was one morning when people came and rummaged about in the loft. The boxes were shifted, and the tree was pulled out. They tumbled it down on the floor pretty roughly, to be sure, but then a man dragged it over toward the stairs where the sun shone. Now life's beginning again, thought the tree, when it felt the fresh air and the first sunbeam. And now it was out in the yard. Everything happened so quickly that the tree forgot to look at itself. There was so much to see all about it. The yard was next door to the garden, and there everything was in bloom. Roses hung fresh and fragrant over the low fence. The lime trees were in flower, and the swallows were flying around and saying, "Kaviri, viri vi, my husband's come." But it wasn't the fir that they meant. "Now I'm going to live," said the tree, in exultation, stretching out its branches. Alas, they were all withered and yellow. It was in a corner that it lay, among weeds and nettles. The gold paper star was still fixed on its crown, and glittered in the bright sunshine. Some of the merry children who had danced about the tree at Christmas and been so gay were playing in the yard. One of the littlest ran across and pulled the gold star off the tree. "Look what's been left on the ugly old Christmas tree," he said, and he trampled on the branches till they snapped under his boots. The tree looked at all the beauty of blossom and freshness in the garden, and then at itself, and it wished it had stayed in its dark corner in the loft. It thought of its fresh youth in the forest, and of the merry Christmas Eve, and of the little mice who had enjoyed listening to the story of Humpty Dumpty. Past and gone, said the poor tree. If only I'd enjoyed myself when I could. Past and gone. The men came and chopped the tree into little bits, a whole bundle of them, and it made a rare blaze under the big brewing kettle, and deeply it sighed, and every sigh was like a little gunfire. So the children who were playing about ran in and sat down in front of the fire and looked at it and cried, "Pop, pop." But at every report, which was a deep sigh, the tree was thinking of some summer day in the forest, or a winter night out there, when the stars were shining. Or it was thinking of Christmas Eve and Humpty Dumpty, the one and only story it had ever heard and knew how to tell. And with that, the tree was burnt up. The boys went on playing in the yard, and the smallest of them had on his chest the gold star which the tree had worn on the happiest evening of its life. It was past and gone now. The tree was past and gone, and the story too. Past and gone, past and gone. It's the same with all stories. Thank you for listening to Sleepy. Good night.